Hey guys, tonight we begin with something ancient, golden, and frankly a little sand, chafed. Life as a pharaoh in ancient Egypt. You might imagine it's all gold masks, sacred cats, and divine power. But let's be honest, it's also 120-degree heat, suspiciously loyal priests, and trying not to die of a tooth infection while being declared a living god. So before we slide headfirst into a world of incense and crocodile cults, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this little corner of history bring people together across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe wrap yourself up in something vaguely Lennon adjacent, and let's begin tonight's journey, one dusty, slightly cursed step at a time. It's not so much that the pharaoh wakes up, as it is that he's awakened, violently, by a chorus of conch-shell trumpets being enthusiastically blasted no more than 3 feet from his eardrums. One moment he's dreaming of floating down the Nile on a lotus leaf, serene and blissful, and the next he's being sonically bludgeoned by 6 attendants who believe volume is sacred. He groans loudly, because he's pharaoh and technically allowed to groan with divine authority. But that doesn't stop the high attendant from cheerfully parting the curtains of his bedchamber, letting in the blinding Egyptian sun. There is no mercy. There is only Ra, shining like a flaming spotlight straight into his royal eyeballs. Great Pharaoh, son of Ra, living Horus, may you reign 10,000 years. The high attendant says, with the same energy one might use to announce breakfast at a moderately successful bed and breakfast. Pharaoh does not want to reign 10,000 years. He barely wants to reign today. He sits up, slowly, stiffly, like a man made entirely of ancient scrolls and regret. His back pops, his knees click. His royal joints perform a reluctant symphony of creaks and crunches. A living god, yes, but also a 38-year-old man who once fell off a chariot while trying to impress a concubine and hasn't quite recovered. The royal mattress is stuffed with the finest reeds from the Nile, which is to say it's basically a particularly judgmental basket. He's slept in sandals softer than this. He swings his legs over the side and lands on imported leopard skin rugs that feel oddly damp. He doesn't ask why. Asking questions before your ceremonial honey bath is a rookie mistake. An army of servants materialize from behind curtains, pillars, and possibly one from inside a pot. They descend upon him with the urgency of people who take divine hygiene very seriously. He is scrubbed with oils. He is smeared with unguents. Someone brushes his teeth with a stick dipped in ground mint and a crushed locust. He tries not to taste it. His hair, what's left of it, is doused in resin and covered in a ceremonial headdress that smells vaguely of onions and old secrets. One servant is in charge of making his eyeliner symmetrical. She's never succeeded, but she tries with the quiet intensity of someone who's seen what happens when the pharaoh's left eye looks moodier than the right. Once sufficiently bathed, painted, and perfumed within an inch of his mortality, the pharaoh is wrapped in layers of linen like a mummy who still has meetings to attend. Then come the gold bangles, the wide jeweled collar, the sandals with tiny golden falcons on the straps. Because nothing says divinity like uncomfortable footwear, he is now radiant, regal, and about 10 degrees too warm. Breakfast is laid out in the hall of eternal morning. It's a lavish spread of figs, flatbreads, date cakes, and what claims to be fish but smells like it died of embarrassment sometime yesterday. There is beer. There is always beer. It is thick, yeasty, and tastes like someone left wet bread in the sun for a month, then said, "Yes, this is fine." The vizier appears as he always does, silently, ominously, holding a tablet with today's schedule chiseled into it. Pharaoh squints at its size and tries to look kingly while chewing something that may have once been a lentil. "Let me guess," he mutters, already knowing. First appease the gods. Then hear petitions from people who are very good at kneeling. Then inspect the grain stores and pretend I understand how grain works. The vizier nods solemnly. And after that, a blessing of the sacred geese. Pharaoh blinks. The geese. Yes, divine one. They've been honking with great fervor. It's seen as an omen. It's always an omen, he says. Why can't they ever just be geese? The vizier offers no answer, because he is both too wise and too afraid. After breakfast, The pharaoh is paraded through the palace corridors, flanked by guards with spears so polished they could blind an enemy with sheer sunlight. He walks past mosaics depicting his many victories, some of which he remembers, some of which are probably optimistic interpretations of a minor skirmish involving 2 donkeys and a misunderstanding about a water jug. Outside, it's already hot enough to bake bricks on the pavement. The temple priests await him beneath the colonnades, their bald heads gleaming, their incense pots smoking like they're trying to impress a dragon. He must now offer prayers to Amun, Wa, Isis, Horus, and half a dozen other deities with very strong opinions on proper chanting rhythm. The ceremony is long. The air is thick with smoke. At one point he zones out and nearly tips into the sacrificial altar. Afterwards, there's a brief but deeply unpleasant moment involving a sacred ibis who mistakes his headdress for nesting material. It is dealt with quietly. Then come the petitions. An endless stream of people bend at the waist and beg for things: land disputes, grain rations, water rights. One man asking if he can name his son, Pharaoh Jinga. The pharaoh tries to listen, but the heat is rising, the beer is settling in his stomach like damp clay, and someone nearby has been wearing the same garlic-scented tunic since the last flood. By noon, he is exhausted. A living god, yes, but also a man who has heard 3 separate disputes about goats and is starting to question the concept of divine justice. There is no rest. There is only the sacred geese. He is escorted to the temple pond, where a gaggle of birds with glossy white feathers and the temperament of irritable scribes await. He blesses them with a practiced wave. They honk back with something that sounds suspiciously like mockery. One of them bites his sandal, and just like that, another day begins in the eternal, sun-scorched kingdom of the Nile, where the gods are many, the people are devout, and the pharaoh just wants 5 minutes of peace and a chair that doesn't squeak like a tortured reed flute. There's a popular belief, mostly upheld by people who have never actually worn gold in the sun, that being pharaoh means lounging beneath palm trees, fed grapes by dancers, and occasionally declaring wars or miracles with the flick of a finger. In truth, most of Pharaoh's afternoons are spent in a small, overheated chamber known, without irony, as the room of divine administration. It has one window. It does not open. The walls are covered in painted reliefs of past pharaohs doing exciting things, smiting enemies, riding chariots, banishing crocodiles with angry hand gestures. Meanwhile, today's pharaoh sits hunched on a polished limestone bench listening to his scribe recite inventory reports about temple linen shortages. 82 bolts were sent to the temple of Bastet, says the scribe, who talks like a scroll unrolling slowly. But only 78 were received. Pharaoh raises a brow. Where did the other 4 go? The scribe consults another scroll, which crackles like dry papyrus in a furnace. Possibly eaten by mice, possibly stolen, possibly miscounted by the man who can't count past 7 without removing a sandal. Pharaoh leans back, or rather, tries to. The bench was carved for someone with the posture of a cobra and the flexibility of an eel. He shifts, winces, and makes a royal grunt that doubles as a request for beer. One of his attendants appears like a genie with a jug and a wooden cup. The beer is lukewarm and gritty, and tastes like fermented disappointment. The vizier enters carrying a handful of amulets, and a look that says something's gone terribly wrong. But we're going to pretend it's a blessing. Sire, he begins, the high priest of Sobek requests an audience. Is it about the sacred crocodile again? Pharaoh asks. Wes, did it bite another priest? Wes, the pharaoh sighs. Fine. But if he asks me to build another temple bath for the creature, I'm naming it after my mother-in-law. While they wait, the room fills with the low hum of scribes scratching away at tablets, carving tax records into clay like the world depends on it. One particularly earnest clerk is tallying the fish harvest from the delta, mumbling numbers under his breath like he's casting a spell. Occasionally, he licks the stylus for no reason anyone can explain. A nobleman is next. He's brought a complaint one of his rivals is hoarding bricks. Pharaoh blinks. Bricks. Yes, divine one. He's storing them in a warehouse near Memphis and refusing to share. The people are saying he plans to build a house with 3 rooms. There's a pause. That monster. Pharaoh deadpans. The nobleman doesn't catch the sarcasm. He bows deeply. Precisely, O just and glorious one, I demand his immediate banishment to the quarries." Pharaoh nods slowly. "We'll investigate thoroughly," which means the vizier will nod at someone, who will nod at someone else, and eventually the bricks will either disappear or be reallocated to a particularly enthusiastic goat enclosure. As the noble leaves, the high priest of Sobek finally arrives, escorted by 2 acolytes and a tiny crocodile wearing a ceremonial necklace. It waddles in with the confidence of a creature who knows it's worshipped and also slightly feared. Pharaoh stares. The crocodile hisses. So, the priest begins, already sweaty despite the shade. Sacred Sobek, in his infinite wisdom and sharpness of tooth, has once again shown his displeasure by biting the thigh of Brother Kenemhotep during morning prayers. Was he kneeling too close? He was bowing in the wrong direction, toward the north, not the northeast. It's considered highly disrespectful. Did Sobek mention that before biting him? The priest blinks, unsure whether this is humor or a divine riddle. Pharaoh pinches the bridge of his nose and waves a hand. Double the fish rations to the crocodile. Send Brother Kenemhotep a fruit basket. And tell Sobek that any more disciplinary actions must go through official channels. The crocodile blinks. The priest bows. Wise as always, O radiant light of the lotus. They shuffle out, leaving behind a faint reptilian musk and a wet footprint that will confuse the palace dog for days. By mid-afternoon, the room of divine administration is beginning to feel like a tomb, minus the peace and plus the paperwork. A tax overseer arrives with a list of villages delinquent on their grain quotas. One is behind because of a sandstorm. One blames locusts. One insists their granary was cursed by a wandering poet. Again with the curses, Pharaoh mutters. What kind of poet curses a granary? Very bitter one. Sire, the overseer replies gravely. His verse was rejected at the festival of moonlight. Pharaoh rubs his temples. Fine. Send a scribe, a priest, and someone who doesn't believe in curses. See what happens. There is a sudden commotion outside the chamber, shouting. Footsteps. Something crashes. The guards tighten their grips on their spears. The vizier leans toward the door, listening. Then a palace servant bursts in, breathless. The royal hippopotamus. He gaps. Has escaped its bath. Pharaoh blinks. Again. It ran into the courtyard, knocked over a water bearer, and is now aggressively sitting in the lotus pond. A long, thoughtful silence follows. Finally, Pharaoh sets down his beer, stands with as much majesty as a man with sweaty thighs and a headache can muster, and declares, let it sit. At least something around here is enjoying itself. And with that, he strides out into the sun, trailed by a coterie of worried scribes, twitchy guards, and a vizier who is already drafting 5 separate reports about the incident. Because that's Pharaoh's life. You wake up divine. You spend your day arbitrating grain curses, crocodile politics, and brick disputes. You end it negotiating with a hippo who outranks most of your cousins. And people say it's good to be king. The thing about royal processions is that they sound majestic in theory. Golden chariots, cheering crowds, priests tossing lotus petals like rice at a wedding. But in practice, they're mostly dust, heat, and the constant threat of stepping in something left behind by a ceremonial ox. Pharaoh is riding in a palanquin today. He's being carried by 8 men who have thighs like temple columns and the dead-eyed resignation of people who have carried someone full of breakfast beer up in 37-degree heat. The canopy overhead is silk dyed with crushed beetles, which sounds luxurious until you remember how beetles smell in the sun. A fan bearer waves palm fronds with the half-hearted rhythm of someone who's been waving the same palm since dawn. Sweat drips down Pharaoh's back in neat rivulets, following the spine like it's trying to sneak out unnoticed. They're heading to the western edge of the city, a visit to the embalmer's district. Officially, it's to oversee the divine process of sacred funerary rites. Unofficially, it's because the high priest of Anubis invited him for what was ambiguously described as an unveiling. Pharaoh has suspicions. As the procession turns a corner near the fish market, a gust of hot wind blasts through the crowd, lifting sand into every fold of his royal attire. Sand in the sleeves, sand in the sandals, sand in places where sand was never meant to go, not even by the cruel standards of desert gods. He grits his teeth and tries to look benevolent, a child tosses a flower toward him. It hits him in the eye. The crowd cheers anyway. Finally, they reach the embalmer's quarter, a cluster of mud brick buildings that smell like old linen and complicated decisions. The high priest greets him with an oily smile and a bow so deep it nearly turns into a fall. "O Pharaoh of endless light," the priest intones, "we are honored beyond death itself." "Lovely," Pharaoh replies, wiping his eye with the corner of his sleeve. "Now what's this unveiling?" The priest leads him inside the workshop. It is cool, dim, and filled with the soft sloshing sound of something being stirred in a jar. Pharaoh has learned not to ask. "Behold," the priest says, gesturing to a freshly wrapped mummy on a slab. The newest innovation in funerary wrapping. 3 layers of protection, 2 layers of symbolism, and 1 discreet compartment for amulets. He claps twice. An assistant pulls back the corner of the wrappings like it's a curtain. Inside is a small pocket sewn into the bandages, holding a scarab charm and a tiny scroll. Pharaoh nods, impressive, and the occupant, former chief baker, died in a honey-related accident. A heroic end, I'm sure, Pharaoh says, trying not to picture it. Another priest approaches with a tray of scented oils. Would his radiance like to bless the bandages? Pharaoh lifts a small jug, sprinkles it over the wrappings, and mutters the standard prayer. "May you walk strong in the field of reeds, and may your organs stay in their jars." The priests bow like he's just summoned a moonbeam. As they leave the workshop, Pharaoh's vizier appears, holding what looks like a scroll and a headache. "Sire, urgent report from the Northern Canal Project." Pharaoh groans. Has someone fallen in again? Worse. They found a crocodile, a large one, with an attitude. Do they need priests? No, sire. They need a larger canal. Pharaoh rubs his temples. He hasn't even had lunch and he's already negotiated with a corpse and approved infrastructure for a crocodile. Fine. Send word to the engineers. And make sure the scribes don't list it as a divine sign. We're already 5 omens behind this week. The return procession is slower, mostly because one of the palanquin bearers twisted his ankle stepping on a loose amphora. They replace him with a backup bearer who appears to be 12 and has the upper body strength of a frightened pigeon. By the time they reach the palace, Pharaoh is lightly marinated in his own sweat, peppered with sand and desperately craving something cold and alcoholic. He retreats to the royal courtyard, which is quiet, too quiet. There are no musicians, no jugglers, and suspiciously no palace cat, who usually greets him with a disdainful flick of the tail. Then he hears it, a splash, a grunt, a heavy thud. He turns the corner and finds the royal hippopotamus still in the lotus pond, now joined by a goat, 2 ducks, and one of the palace scribes who appears to be stuck waist deep in mud. Explain, Pharaoh says, pointing at the scribe. The scribe, wild-eyed, gasps. "I was trying to retrieve a scroll." The goat ate the first one. The goat bleats with what can only be described as defiance. Pharaoh sighs, turns to the head steward, and says, from now on, official records are to be kept inside the palace, preferably somewhere goats aren't considered part of the staff. The steward nods and jots it down, then adds a note to review goat privileges. That evening, the royal dinner is a triumph of burnt onions, overcooked pigeon, and a bread loaf that could double as a building material. Pharaoh chews slowly, reflecting on his day. He's blessed a mummy, approved a crocodile bypass, dodged a ceremonial ox's bowel movement, and was nearly blinded by a child's flower. He's divine. He's powerful. He's also chafing. And just as he lifts his cup for one final sip of lukewarm, slightly gritty beer, a servant bursts into the room, breathless. "Sire!" Urgent message from the southern mines. Pharaoh raises one royal eyebrow. Let me guess. Either a cave, in or someone thinks they found a talking rock. The servant stammers, both. Pharaoh closes his eyes. It's not that he doesn't love being Pharaoh. It's just that sometimes he wishes someone else could reign for a day. Maybe the goat. Pharaoh is dreaming of something pleasant for once. A wide, breezy barge on the Nile, drifting past palm trees that wave like old friends. There's music in the distance, soft and harp-like, no priests, no goats, no paperwork. Then the barge explodes. He jerks awake to the sound of panicked shouting outside his chambers and the unmistakable clatter of someone dropping a ceremonial tray. The vizier storms in, which, for a man who usually moves like a drifting cloud of pessimism, is a statement in itself. Sire, he hisses, you must rise at once. The royal dream interpreter is here. He insists it is urgent. A pharaoh groans. It's always urgent. Last week I dreamed about a fish with legs, and he declared I was destined to marry a sand dune. This time, the vizier says grimly, you dreamed of a barge exploding. Pharaoh pauses. Wait, that wasn't metaphorical. Apparently, half the palace staff heard you shout, not the olives, and fall out of bed. So, still half wrapped in a linen sheet and wearing what could generously be called a night kilt, Pharaoh is ushered into the chamber of divine sleep analysis, which is really just a closet with incense and someone's idea of a mystical curtain. It's a repurposed tablecloth. The royal dream interpreter greets him with exaggerated bows and an elaborate headdress shaped like a falcon stuck in mid-sneeze. O divine one, vessel of visions, may your eyelids always tremble with meaning, he intones. Pharaoh suppresses a sigh. I dreamed of a barge. It exploded. There were olives. Go. The interpreter claps dramatically, as though Pharaoh has just described the climax of a 3-act tragedy. This is a powerful omen, he says. The barge represents your kingdom, the explosion upheaval, the olives, symbols of nourishment and possibly slippery surfaces. He consults a chart that appears to be equal parts astrology, animal entrails, and artistic improvisation. I believe, my lord, that this means someone close to you is planning betrayal, or indigestion, possibly both. Pharaoh stares at him. That covers roughly everyone I've ever met. Then it is an accurate dream. There's a long silence. Pharaoh considers using the curtain as a gag. Instead, he waves a hand. Very well. Take note, Vizier, have the food tasters double their efforts, and tell the kitchen to ease up on the olives. The Vizier nods solemnly. Already done. Just as Pharaoh is about to retreat for something resembling breakfast, a second messenger arrives, red in the face and very nearly tripping over his own sandals.
Sire!
The royal dentist is requesting your presence. Pharaoh freezes. Why? Hair found something. Is it my last nerve? No, my lord, a molar. In the hallway, Pharaoh winces. Fine. Tell him I'll see him after I eat. Actually, the messenger says, eyes darting, insists on seeing you before you eat. Something about chewing diagnostics. This is how Pharaoh finds himself reclining in the garden of mandrake blossoms with his mouth open, and a man poking around with a stick made of ivory and fearlessness. The royal dentist is not a reassuring presence. He's hunched, smells like cloves, and hums hymns to Thoth while working. His breath could etch limestone. Ah yes, he murmurs, tapping a tooth. This one is angry. It's a tooth, Pharaoh replies. They don't get emotions. Oh, but they do, the dentist says. This one is harboring resentment, possibly from your younger years. Did you chew many date pits as a boy? Maybe. Once, twice, often. Why, you have the molars of a stone grinder, sire. Remarkable, tragic, heroic, Pharaoh gurgles. I recommend a poultice of garlic, mint, and crushed beetles. Left overnight. In the mouth, Pharaoh sits upright. No, absolutely not. I am the living god of the Nile, not a compost pile. The dentist looks mildly offended. Suit yourself. But when your molar rebels during the next moon phase, don't say I didn't warn you. He vanishes into the garden like a cursed wind. Pharaoh heads for the dining hall, muttering under his breath. The meal is waiting. Cold flatbread, a wedge of goat cheese that could double as a doorstop, and a bowl of something green that smells like it lost a bet. He pokes it with a spoon. It wobbles ominously. The high steward enters, balancing a new scroll, and the haunted look of someone who's been yelled at by 3 different priests before breakfast. Sire, he says, Horgent update from the Apis Bull stables. A Pharaoh blinks. Which part of that sentence do you think is good news? There's been a confusion. Of course there has. They've accidentally anointed 2 bowls as sacred. Pharaoh sets down his spoon. 2. Yes. Both are large. Both are black. Both have a white mark on their forehead in the shape of something holy. One resembles the Eye of Re. The other resembles a rather aggressive onion. Was anyone sober during this ceremony? The steward looks deeply uncomfortable. It was very foggy that morning. Spiritually foggy, Pharaoh exhales slowly. Tell them to keep both bulls. Just call one the backup divinity. We'll sort it out next flood season. He finally takes a bite of the cheese. It resists, then gives way like a philosophical stone. Somewhere in the back of his mouth, a molar whimpers. After the meal, he retreats to his private chamber, the one place in the entire palace not currently hosting a sacred animal, dream interpreter, or edible rock. He lowers himself into a chair made from imported cedar and old grudges, stares out at the Nile, and wonders aloud, is it too much to ask for one day, without dream omens, tooth threats, and holy bulls that look like produce? Outside, a breeze picks up. Somewhere, faintly, a crocodile sneezes. Being Pharaoh means making decisions, big ones, like how many statues of yourself is too many trick question there's no such number, or whether the festival of Horus should include live hawks this year, despite what happened last time. Today's decision is allegedly about architecture. The royal architect has requested, or rather demanded, a private consultation. This is never a good sign. His requests arrive on elaborately inked scrolls that smell faintly of self-importance, and always begin with, as commanded by destiny and good tasty. He is now pacing in front of Pharaoh's courtyard throne, wearing a linen robe that swishes dramatically every time he turns, and a headdress shaped like a miniature obelisk. It bobs with authority. It is also hollow, which explains the echo. Sire, he begins, with the gravitas of a man who once designed a granary shaped like a beetle. Your tomb is outdated. Pharaoh blinks. Outdated. I'm not even dead yet. Exactly. Which is why now is the perfect time to upgrade. Your current burial plan is tragically modest. It's a pyramid. A small one. It's still a pyramid. With only 2 false chambers and barely any cursed passageways. Have you seen the blueprints of the last dynasty's tomb?
They had trapdoors and a riddle chamber.
Pharaoh sighs. What if I don't want a riddle chamber? The architect gasps like he's been personally stabbed by a stylus. Without a riddle chamber, how will your spirit test the worth of intruders? I was hoping the large boulder trap would do that. Out of fashion, the architect says grimly. Everyone uses sandpits now. Elegant, subtle you fall in, and poof! Ankle deep in symbolism. Pharaoh rubs his temples. What do you want from me? A bigger tomb, with proper acoustics. For chanting. He slaps a scroll down onto the table. It unfurls dramatically, revealing a sketch of a vast underground labyrinth that looks suspiciously like it might also double as a wine cellar. This is very ambitious, Pharaoh says. It's also necessary. Do you want future generations thinking you reigned for 30 years and were buried in something that could pass for a storage shed? It's a sacred storage shed. Pharaoh mumbles. The architect straightens his tiny obelisk hat and continues. This tomb will echo with eternity. Every footstep will whisper your name. There will be hieroglyphs so intricate, people will argue about them for centuries. Pharaoh closes his eyes. How much? Only the labor of 600 men for 7 years, a small fleet of cedar, and perhaps a little extra incense for artistic morale. Incense, for morale. The architect nods, deadly serious. Sandalwood improves chiseling precision. Before Pharaoh can object, the vizier materializes like a sarcastic shadow. Sire, he says in the flat tone of a man who's just dealt with a shipment of improperly labeled ostrich feathers. Your presence is requested in the royal menagerie. Why? There's been an incident with the sacred baboons. Pharaoh stands. I'll deal with that first. The architect bows, clinging to his scroll. Shall I continue work on the moonlit stairwell of legacy? No stairs. Ramp. I don't want to be climbing anything in the afterlife. As you wish, he says, insulted but inspired. The royal menagerie smells like ambition and bird droppings. It houses the kingdom's divine creatures, lions who stare like disapproving relatives, falcons with superiority complexes, and a tortoise that's either 200 years old or an unusually slow rock. But today, it's all about the baboons. They were a gift from Nubia. Sacred to Thoth, which means they're also legally unpunishable, even if they have developed a habit of throwing fruit at diplomats. Pharaoh approaches cautiously. A keeper bows. We have a situation. He gestures to the largest baboon, currently wearing a royal necklace and sitting on the scribe's bench. It's holding a stylus and pounding it against a clay tablet with the focus of a scholar and the chaos of a child on honeyed beer. He watched the scribes, the keeper explains. Then he took over. Another baboon is chewing on a papyrus scroll. A third is perched on the head of a statue of Isis, possibly meditating or possibly asleep. Is anything broken? Pharaoh asks. Only the daily census. And the chief scribe's spirit? Excellent. The chief scribe, hovering nearby, looks pale. He corrected one of my grammar marks. He whispers, maybe it's divine. Pharaoh offers. He also licked the ink. Very divine? Pharaoh says. The lead baboon shrieks with joy, flings the stylus, and flees up a pillar. The vizier murmurs, shall I summon the priest of Thoth? To bless the baboon? To apologize to it, sire. Technically, if it has assumed the scribal seat of its own will, it might be hosting a divine spirit. Pharaoh pinches the bridge of his nose. Do we have to? It's either that or risk offending Thoth's simian vessel. Fine. Offer him some figs and a quill. Let him feel important. A moment passes. Make sure no one gives him royal seal access. Pharaoh adds. Last thing we need is an official edict authorizing more bananas. He retreats before the situation escalates into a simian-led literacy rebellion. Later, in the cool gloom of the garden, Pharaoh finally finds a moment of peace. A small fountain gurgles. The sun lowers. There's no architect, no baboon, no sacred goat trying to eat his sandals. Just silence, until a servant tiptoes up. Sire, a merchant from Crete has arrived, with a dancing bear. Pharaoh stares into the fountain. Of course he has. There is a special kind of dread that sets in when the royal court poet is scheduled to perform at breakfast. The pharaoh, despite being the most powerful man in Egypt, or so the granite statues claimed, could not, for political reasons, hurl a lyre at the poet's head. Today's performance was titled Ode to the Eternal Radiance of the Divine Pharaoh's Left Foot, and it was, as usual, excruciating. The poet, Marut, had a voice like a thirsty papyrus scroll, and the artistic subtlety of a collapsing mud brick wall. He stood dramatically near the fruit tray, ate one fig and an anxious pomegranate, gesturing wildly as he described the pharaoh's foot in unnecessarily sensual detail. The court pretended to enjoy it. Applause in ancient Egypt was a polite shuffle of the feet, or if you were feeling particularly enthusiastic, the soft clink of bracelets. Today, no one dared shuffle too loudly. The pharaoh was nursing a sandstorm headache, and every syllable felt like it was being chiseled into the back of his skull by a particularly vengeful stonemason. Perhaps a poem about my right foot next time. The pharaoh mumbled, half as a joke, half as a plea. Merut gasped, bowing so low his wig came askew. Brilliance! The symmetry, the metaphor, the audacity! My king is both muse and monarch. The pharaoh regretted everything. Outside the palace, the sky was turning the colour of overcooked lentils, a sign of an approaching sandstorm, which meant everything inside had to be tied down, covered, or blessed, depending on your religious affiliations. The guards were already grumbling as they fastened leather shutters and helped the kitchen slaves shovel sand out of the atrium for the third time that week. Sandstorms in Egypt were not poetic. They were not soft, swirling breezes or golden veils of mystery. They were furious, airborne sandpaper. They got into your eyes, your teeth, your bathwater, and once, quite memorably, into the pharaoh's private scroll stash. He was still finding gritty metaphors in the Book of the Dead, but even sandstorms could not halt the sacred duties of a pharaoh. Today's main event, divine petitions. Once a week, various high priests, scribes, goat herders, and self-declared visionaries came forward with petitions. Some sought blessings, others justice, and at least 2 this morning were here to inform the pharaoh that a hippo had spoken to them in a dream. The first petitioner was a temple priest from Dendera. He claimed a hippo had emerged from the Nile, walked across a patch of reeds without sinking, and sneezed precisely 7 times. And so, the pharaoh asked, blinking sand out of his eyes. And so it is clearly a sign from the gods. The hippo is a sacred vessel, the priest said. We propose immediate canonization. Perhaps build it a shrine, some modest offerings, nothing lavish, a few gold amulets, maybe a small boat made of ivory. The pharaoh stared at the man. You want to deify a sneezing hippo? The priest nodded solemnly. It didn't sink. Neither does dry papyrus. Your wisdom stuns me. Radiant one. The pharaoh sighed and glanced toward the royal steward. Is there room in the treasury for another god? The steward looked pained. Only if we demote the ibis again. Do it, the pharaoh muttered. The second hippo petitioner was less poetic and more urgent. The beast charged my boat, ate my oar, took a divine dump on my cousin. Surely this is not sacred behavior. Did the hippo sneeze? Asked the pharaoh. No. Then it's just a hippo. As the petitions droned on, the pharaoh's stomach grumbled ominously. Meals were supposed to be elegant affairs. Honey roasted locusts, dates, goat cheese, grilled fish. But between sandstorms and temple taxes, the pantry was increasingly creative. Today's lunch was a kind of paste made of lentils, sour figs, and something that might have once been chickpeas if you squinted. He dipped a bit of flatbread in it and chewed slowly, trying not to imagine how old the figs had to be to taste like sandal. More beer, my lord? The steward asked, holding out a jug that smelled faintly of wet reeds. Yes, please. I need to forget this paste. As he drank, the pharaoh spotted his royal architect, approaching with the expression of a man preparing to ask for a pyramid-sized favor. That's because he was. Divine one, the architect said, bowing with theatrical flair. I bring news of your burial plans. I'm not dead yet. Of course not. But as you have decreed, your tomb must reflect your unmatched glory. And my unmatched tax rate, the pharaoh muttered. And we have calculated that if construction continues as ordered, we will require 100 more workers, 3,000 cubits of limestone, and possibly another Nile. The pharaoh blinked. Another Nile. To float the stones, naturally. The pharaoh took another sip of beer. Have you considered just making the tomb slightly less glorious? The architect gasped like someone had slapped him with a scroll. But my king, posterity demands. Posterity can learn to appreciate minimalism. Minimalism? In Egypt. The pharaoh waved him off. Get creative. Maybe reuse a few blocks. I won't mind. I'll be dead. By mid-afternoon, the storm had reached full throttle. Everything rattled. Palm trees bowed like they were apologizing to the gods. And inside, the royal cats, sacred and spoiled, had decided to express their displeasure by climbing the curtains and vomiting on ceremonial cushions. A servant arrived with a message. The chief astrologer requests your presence. Is it another eclipse? No, sire. He believes your star is moving. Is it allowed to do that? No one knows. With a groan that started in his toes and ended in his eyebrows, the pharaoh stood and braced for more sacred nonsense. His sandals had filled with sand again. He adjusted his crown. It was too tight, always too tight, and walked out into the storm, where the divine desert bit at his face, and the sacred hippo, somewhere downriver, probably sneezed again. The pharaoh muttered into the wind. It's exhausting being a god. And the sandstorm agreed. It's not the gods you hear first. It's the silence. And it's not comforting. Silence in the palace means someone is holding their breath. Probably a whole staff of linen, draped mortals awaiting Pharaoh's divine displeasure. You shift on your gold inlaid chair, throne, technically, but it feels more like a judgment bench. And the cushion underneath makes a sound like a defeated duck. That's your only luxury. The cushion. You suspect a scribe has written a hymn about it. The room smells of melted incense and anticipation. A priest clears his throat with the theatricality of a man who's practiced for 3 hours to get it just right. He holds a papyrus scroll so reverently you'd think it held the secrets of the afterlife. It doesn't. It's just the latest list of divine decrees your high priests expect you to approve, written in a script so flowery it should be planted. The high priest of Amun, a man with a beard that deserves its own sarcophagus, bows low. O living Horus, great bull, radiance of Ra, light of the two lands. Wouldst thou consider the following humble adjustments to temple grain allotments? You don't even blink anymore. You just nod. It's safer. Last time you questioned a temple budget, the Nile mysteriously flooded a week late, and everyone looked at you like you'd personally insulted Hapi. Gods in Egypt are everywhere, in everything, and far too often in your business. Being pharaoh means being divine, yes, but only in theory. In practice, you are a fragile, sweating human whose bowel movements are watched by 3 attendants because they think it's auspicious. There's no privacy, no real power, and definitely no fun. The gods demand, the priests interpret, and you sign. That's the process. You're basically a sacred middle manager. You try to remember the last time you made a decision that didn't involve consulting a dream, interpreter, an astrologer, or a man who reads omens in duck livers. Spoiler, you can't. Even your breakfast was chosen by someone based on auspicious goat behavior. You can't even escape into food. Every bite is blessed, measured, and tasted by someone else first, which ruins both the suspense and the flavor. And the temples. Don't get started on the temples. The kingdom is slowly sinking under the weight of its own piety. There are temples to gods of rivers, gods of reeds, gods of breath, gods of mediocre weather. Every priest thinks their god should get new granite columns. For eternity, they say. What they mean is, for prestige and donations. And if you say no, expect a passive-aggressive eclipse or a locust cameo in your breakfast pottage. You stare at the ceiling. Painted stars. Very pretty. Possibly cursed. Who knows? The walls are covered in carvings of you. Smiling. Smoting, standing tall. Divine. It's a flattering lie in limestone. The real you is hunched over, trying not to offend any feathered god spirits by breathing wrong. A scribe shuffles in. Apologies. Great radiance. A delegation from Nubia requests your luminous audience. Delegation. Code for negotiations. Which means another performance. You sigh through your nose. Even your sighs are sacred. That's the other part of being Pharaoh. You don't get emotions. You get divine reactions. Anger becomes righteous fury. Confusion becomes mysterious wisdom. Hunger. A sign that the gods require more offerings. You wave a hand, and the priests disperse like, well, perfumed smoke. The delegation enters. Gold jewelry, big smiles, and bigger agendas. You pretend to listen. They pretend to flatter. Somewhere, a scribe is writing this meeting down as the glorious moment of international unity. Really, it's about taxes and goats. Everything comes back to goats. When the meeting ends which is to say when the high priest gives you the subtle eyebrow of enough diplomacy, you're escorted back to your quarters. Not to rest. Rest is for peasants. You have a ritual to attend. The nightly one where your soul reenacts Ra's journey through the underworld. It involves a boat, a costume, and several elderly men chanting in falsetto. You get dressed. Again, not by yourself. What are you, a farmer? No, 10 people help. One oils your feet. One applies gold powder to your collarbones. Another adjusts the kilt that's more ceremonial than functional. There are more pleats in your outfit than there are grains in a priest's lunch offering. Once prepared, you are escorted to the temple boat, which is not really a boat so much as a glorified float with gilded ibis heads. The priests begin the chants. You step aboard. The crowd cheers. Not for you, exactly. For the idea of you. The god-shaped symbol that keeps the cosmos in motion. You're basically celestial duct tape. You drift along the temple canal, waving with the stiffness of a man trying not to fall in. The chants rise. The incense wafts. A beetle crawls up your shin. You try not to twitch. Dignity is a tightrope. Finally, the ceremony ends. You disembark and are immediately handed a ceremonial fruit that has no name and less flavor. It's a gesture. Everything's a gesture. Life as a pharaoh is just one long, hot, sweaty gesture. Back in your quarters, you're derobed, re-oiled, and wrapped in linens so fine you suspect they're spun from spider disappointment. You climb into your bed, a stone platform with the approximate comfort of a smug sarcophagus. The attendants bow back out and leave you with your thoughts. You stare at the ceiling again. Still stars, still pretty, still not freedom. You think, just briefly, about being someone else, a potter maybe, or a reed cutter. Someone who wakes with the sun and eats fish with their hands and swears at the Nile without worrying about offending a hippo deity. But you're Pharaoh, God King, living Horus, divine ruler of the two lands, and you are, as always, exhausted. One of the great misconceptions about being a pharaoh is that it's all statues and sandals, like ruling from a throne made of gold while being gently fanned with palm leaves by eternally grateful servants. The reality is slightly less majestic and more limestone. Because when you're the living embodiment of a god on earth, everyone expects you to build monuments to your own glory, preferably ones visible from space, and that means pyramids. It starts innocently enough. You sketch a triangle on a bit of papyrus during a council meeting. You were doodling out of boredom while the high priest was explaining the latest omens from a goose's spleen. Next thing you know, thousands of people are hauling massive stone blocks across the desert for your eternal resting place. And you can't even remember if you wanted it facing the sunrise or the river. Pyramids aren't just tombs. Oh no, they're statements. They say, look at me. I'm the kind of guy who can redirect an entire economy to stack rocks into a point. And they come with committees, which is never a good sign. You'd think being Pharaoh would mean unilateral decision making, but you try telling the royal architect that you want fewer steps and more curves. He'll look at you like you suggested building it out of mud and hope. The labour force is vast and grumbling. Contrary to popular myth, it's not all slaves. It's mostly conscripted peasants who would rather be anywhere else. Like me, deep in a crocodile-infested irrigation canal, than lugging another slab up a makeshift ramp that's held together with wishful thinking and camel spit. And speaking of ramps, no one knows how they work. Not really. You ask 3 engineers how to build a pyramid and get 5 answers, none of which make any physical sense. We build the ramp as we build the pyramid, one says. Then dismantle it from the top down. Another proposes a spiral ramp. A third mutters something about teleporting the stones with music and incense. Meanwhile, you're just sitting there wondering if a large wooden ladder would have been easier. You try to oversee progress, of course. You do the grand inspection, standing on a raised dais in full ceremonial regalia, pretending you can see the difference between 2 types of limestone. One of them is slightly less dusty. You nod sagely. The priests murmur about divine vision. You don't correct them. Then there's the budgeting. You'd think the treasury would be overflowing with gold, but most of it is tied up in temple donations, flood repair, and importing strange perfumes for your latest queen. Meanwhile, pyramid construction runs on bread and onions, and there's never quite enough of either. The overseer of provisions constantly complains that the workers are eating too much. The workers complain they're eating too little. Someone tries to sneak in lentils, and a riot nearly breaks out. And because you're expected to outshine your predecessor, your pyramid must be bigger, taller, shinier. Never mind that the last guy's collapsed from structural flaws. That's seen as a challenge, not a cautionary tale. You suggest a modest tomb, something more manageable. The royal scribe looks at you like you just proposed renouncing the sun god and becoming a shepherd. To make matters worse, people keep dying during construction. Not in cursed ways, mind you, just in extremely boring, avoidable, and very human ways. Someone falls off a scaffold. Someone else gets flattened by a runaway cart full of bricks. There's paperwork. There's wailing. There's a growing list of funerals, which you're expected to attend, because divine sympathy strengthens the people's morale. But sympathy is hard when your sandals are full of sand, and your back aches from standing in ceremonial posture for 6 hours. Every once in a while, a foreign dignitary arrives to tour your great project. They're always impressed. They always ask the same question: will it be finished before you die? You always answer with a tight smile and vague references to divine will, while secretly calculating whether even live long enough to see the second tier completed. Spoiler, probably not. And then there's the workers' graffiti. Oh yes, you know about it. Behind the smooth outer casing stones, inside the dusty crawl spaces only architects and rats venture into, workers are etching crude jokes about your ears, your chin, your mother. One particularly artistic crew painted a tiny mural of you being chased by a goose while tripping over your own kilt. It's oddly accurate. Still, the pyramid rises. Slowly, painfully. You attend weekly meetings to discuss block placement and slope angles. One week, the builders decide the slope is too steep. Another week, too shallow. A month later, someone realizes the corners don't align with the stars properly, which apparently offends the gods and throws the afterlife off by at least 2 eternities. You try not to panic. By the time you're halfway dead and fully exhausted, the pyramid is half finished, and the project has devoured half the kingdom's surplus grain. You commission a backup tome, smaller, simpler, hidden in a valley somewhere, just in case. You call it Plan B, but everyone knows it as that one will actually finish. Ironically, that little side project gets done first. Still, you smile for the people. You wave your staff. You tell yourself the pyramid will endure forever, even if your knees won't. You attend the ceremonial dedication of the inner chamber with great fanfare, ignoring the suspicious groan from one of the ceiling beams. You order your name to be carved in every hallway, every block, every nook, because in the end, it's not about comfort, or success, or even survival. It's about legacy. And yours is going to weigh about 6 million tons. Now, you'd think being the living embodiment of Horus would come with some perks. Golden sandals, check. A temple choir that chants your name like it's on repeat. Absolutely. Endless supplies of figs. Yes, but only the dried ones that make your teeth stick together like they're conspiring against you. But today is not about figs. Today is about bureaucracy. Ancient, soul-numbing, ink-stained bureaucracy. The royal scribes, bless their shriveled little fingers, are lined up like judgmental cranes, each wielding a brush that hasn't seen a cleaning in a decade. They await the Pharaoh's blessing on no less than 247 papyrus scrolls, all of which seem to involve extremely urgent matters like whether a goat grazing 2 cubits into a neighbor's barley field constitutes an act of war, or if 2 concubines scheduling their hair oil appointments at the same time is cause for divine arbitration. The Pharaoh is seated on the throne, not the grand gilded one from ceremony, no, but the lesser one used for practical governance, which has the cushion density of an angry crocodile and smells faintly of mildew, bird droppings, and despair. A fan bearer does his best to wave the heat away, but the Nile's breeze refuses to cooperate, settling instead on being a warm, slightly damp suggestion of air movement. Flies orbit the room like priestly spies, their buzz forming an offbeat rhythm that makes you question reality. Next scroll. The scribe says, with the cadence of someone who regrets both his profession and his life choices, "Let it be known," he drones, "that the village of Red Dune requests permission to dig the irrigation canal which, they claim, was stolen by a wandering cow." The Pharaoh raises a wary hand. How does a cow steal a canal? They didn't say, divine one. They just insist the cow is now the rightful owner and that we owe it back taxes in grain. A long sigh escapes him. He stamps it. The cow wins. Again. Then comes the ceremonial tax audit. Oh yes, the Pharaoh gets audited. Not personally, of course. That would be absurd. No, the gods don't do taxes. But the Temple of Amun does. And they've brought receipts. Receipts written in the tiniest, most scratchy hieroglyphs possible. Little bird heads and coiled ropes and baskets as far as the squinting eye can see. There's one that claims the Pharaoh owes 3 amphorae of pomegranate wine to the temple treasury because someone sneezed during last year's flood festival, and the high priest interpreted it as a bad omen that needed to be drowned in libations. He tries to contest it. "You're telling me," the Pharaoh says, pointing at the scroll, "that because of a sneeze, I'm now short 3 wine jars." The priest, who has the charisma of an undercooked onion, nods solemnly. "A very powerful sneeze, Your Majesty. There's no winning." The gods, apparently, love pomegranate wine. Stamp. By midday, the Pharaoh's hand is cramping, his brain is pudding, and his royal backside is now fused to the throne in what future scholars will refer to as thronal fatigue. His only reprieve comes when a servant offers him a clay bowl of cold lentil mash with the hopeful look of someone delivering a sacred elixir. He eats it. It tastes like wall plaster and memories. Then the door opens and in sweeps a minor noble with the confidence of someone who's never known consequences. "Great Pharaoh," he booms,
I bring a matter of utmost urgency.
"a hawk has nested in my olive tree, and I demand compensation for its droppings." The Pharaoh blinks. "You want me to pay you for bird droppings?" "No, no," the man corrects, as though it's the Pharaoh who doesn't understand the absurdity of life. "I want the hawk arrested for defiling sacred produce." There's a pause. A very long one. The fan bearer briefly stops fanning. Somewhere, a scribe drops his brush. And then the Pharaoh does the only sensible thing. He stamps a scroll authorizing the hawk's arrest and prays the bird flies far, far away before anyone catches it. Later, as the sun begins its final descent and the scrolls dwindle to a mere mountainous heap, the vizier slides in like an oil-slick shadow. "My liege," he whispers. "There is also the matter of the royal naming ceremony for your newest cat." "Ah yes, Bastet forbid a royal cat goes unnamed longer than 3 days. It might invite chaos, plagues, or worse, tabby rebellion. The pharaoh straightens up, deadpan. Let it be named garlic. The vizier raises an eyebrow. Garlic. He repeats. Yes. The pharaoh says, exhausted. It is small, pungent, and unwelcome in my bedchamber. The vizier makes a note. Garlic, bringer of hairballs, shall now have a shrine the size of a wine jug and her own linen blanket. Just as the pharaoh thinks he's free, a messenger runs in, dusty and dishevelled. He falls at the pharaoh's feet. A great storm brews over the western desert. He gasps. The people demand a blessing to protect their granaries. The pharaoh sighs and raises both arms toward the ceiling. May the sands blow somewhere else, and may your grain remain mostly unspoiled. It's not the most poetic blessing, but it's heartfelt, probably. The messenger nods solemnly and runs back out to deliver it as divine prophecy. As the day finally ebbs away, the pharaoh shuffles back to his quarters, escorted by torchlight. His sandals flap softly, a royal whisper of exhaustion. The corridors are quiet, save for the chirping of distant crickets and the low croak of a priest reciting tomorrow's festival menu. He passes Garlic, who is sitting on the windowsill licking herself like she owns the palace. Because, frankly, she might. The pharaoh flops onto his bed, which is essentially a large, wooden suggestion of comfort topped with a woven mat, and a pillow filled with crushed reeds and the tears of 1,000 scribes. He stares at the ceiling, which is painted with stars that no longer feel magical, and exhales deeply. Tomorrow, he murmurs, I am faking a divine illness. Garlic meows in approval, or maybe disapproval. It's hard to tell with cats. Either way, she curls beside him, and somewhere outside, a hawk watches warily, the newest fugitive in a kingdom of nonsense. So now the pharaoh is dead. That was not part of the morning plan, but here we are. One moment you're choking on a pomegranate seed in the garden, while trying to avoid a meeting about grain taxes. The next you're being embalmed by men who won't meet your glazed, regal stare. Dignity. Gone. Even the gods are probably sighing, well, he tried. But death is just the beginning of logistics. First comes the wailing, loud, performative nasal. Professional mourners descend like sandflies with tear, streaked cheeks and lungs like war trumpets. You'd think the pharaoh was their beloved uncle, not the man who taxed their lentils into oblivion. Still, it's tradition. And in Egypt, tradition means everything and explains nothing. Then comes the paperwork. Not metaphorically. Actual papyrus scrolls flood the palace. Who gets what, which priests do what chants, and which tomb architect suddenly has to speed. Run a monument you were told would take at least 20 good years. You gave him 30. He spent 20, 9 doing nothing, and now wants hazard pay for accelerated deadlines. Your tomb, let's talk about that. You envisioned something majestic, a sprawling architectural marvel filled with sacred art, golden statues, and poetic carvings that future generations would look upon and whisper, "Eh, what a ruler, what you get is eh." Because no one wants to say it out loud, but funding is tight. After all, you spent the empire's fortune building temples for gods that might not even exist and throwing gold at oracles who gave weather forecasts with a 40% accuracy rate. So your pyramid? It's more of a trapezoid. The paintwork, let's call it experimental. And those hieroglyphs, they read like the rushed homework of a scribe who's already halfway drunk. Meanwhile, your organs are being stored in tiny jars with faces on them. Lovely. Intestines, in the jar shaped like a jackal. Lungs, falcon jar. Stomach, baboon. Heart, gone, why? Because someone whispered that the gods might weigh it against a feather, and nobody wants to risk you being heavier than bird fluff. Apparently, your eternal fate hinges on portion control. Now, to the funeral. Picture it a hot, glaring sun that's less divine orb, and more eye of judgment. A procession of sweating dignitaries, fanning themselves while pretending to be grief-stricken. Priests chanting things they only half remember, stumbling over spells that were last relevant 2 dynasties ago. A cow is sacrificed for luck. Someone faints. The embalmer drops your foot. No one mentions it. Your sarcophagus is lowered into your tomb, with a combination of reverence and grunting. You're surrounded by things you'll never use. Boats that don't float, games with missing pieces, sandals made for feet far more regal than yours. There's a harp player playing music no one enjoys, and a line of nobles trying to look poetic as they toss in symbolic offerings while checking the time sundials. Then the door closes, sand falls. Darkness wraps you up like a damp wool blanket. You're sealed in, and now you wait. For what? Who knows? The afterlife, hopefully. A reunion with the gods, maybe. But also grave robbers. Because despite everything you did to keep your tomb hidden, someone in your court sold the map for a jug of wine and a goat. Your resting place is less sacred eternal refuge and more hominid archaeological buffet. Within weeks, someone with terrible breath and sticky fingers will pry open your tomb, steal your amulets, and leave you wearing one sandal and a sore expression. Your mummy will end up halfway unwrapped, missing a nose, and transported through time. First to a noble's private curiosity cabinet, then to a museum in a country you've never heard of, under lighting that flickers and a sign that reads, "Unnamed Pharaoh, possibly important." Children will gawk. Scholars will speculate. Nobody will get your name right. So much for eternal glory, and all that legacy you fought for. Tricky. Because the next pharaoh rewrites history. Your monuments are defaced to make room for his. Your temple is repurposed as a grain storehouse. The priests you paid handsomely now sing praises to your rival. Even your statues are recycled, your face scraped off and replaced with someone else's idea of nobility. Your legacy boils down to a few inconsistent scrolls, a misshapen pyramid, and the rumor that you once choked on fruit. Not exactly the tales of Ra and Osiris you were hoping for. And yet, there's something oddly comforting in it. Because even in your failure, you weren't alone. Every pharaoh before you also tried to rule the heavens and ended up just another sand-swept name. Each thought he'd outwit time. None succeeded. You're part of a grand tradition of men pretending they could control floods, stars, dreams, and destiny with the right hat and a decree. In truth, you were always a man in a very hot place wearing very heavy jewelry, making very big decisions with very little sleep. You were worshipped, yes. Feared, certainly. But understood? Rarely. Maybe that's all life is, pharaoh or not, a series of plans undone by fruit, fickle gods, and the fact that nobody, not even a living god-king, can stop the sand from swallowing everything eventually. So yes, it sucked to be pharaoh, but it sucked beautifully. And sometimes that's enough. The end, when it finally came, was about as relaxing as a crocodile in your bathtub. Pharaoh's death was neither glorious nor God-sent. It involved a bad date both on the calendar and the fruit, a suspiciously green fish, and a bout of divine indigestion that saw him clutching his stomach and swearing oaths to half the pantheon. It's hard to look regal while hunched over a gold, inlaid vomit bowl. The royal physicians circled like anxious vultures with herbs, prayers, and far too many leeches. One tried to summon Sekhmet. Another tried to administer a purge made of garlic and honey, and something they diplomatically called cleansing clay. The pharaoh waved them all away, and asked only that someone tell the scribe to update his tome murals. Particularly the one of him triumphing over the sea peoples, which he just remembered never actually happened. But kings don't get to die privately in Egypt. No, they pass into the arms of Ra, with half the city watching. By the time he was laid on the embalming slab, half the court had shown up to weep in artistically appropriate increments. The high priest of Anubis said something moving about the cyclical nature of time and the eternal greatness of Pharaoh. Then his sandal fell off mid-eulogy, and everyone just pretended that was a symbol of earthly burdens being cast away. And so, the embalming began. It's hard to overstate how unpleasant embalming was when you're the star of the show. First, they pull your brain out through your nose using a bronze hook that looks like something you'd use to clean a camel's hoof. This is performed by priests called parashamu, whose bedside manner falls somewhere between disinterested butcher and exhausted librarian. Then, your internal organs are scooped out, weighed, and plopped into jars with faces. You know, just in case your liver wanted to have a chat in the afterlife. Your heart, the seat of your soul, gets special attention. It's weighed against a feather to determine if you were a good person. No pressure. Luckily, as Pharaoh, you can commission your own feather-adjusted scale. Some earlier kings had even been buried with a backup heart, just in case the first one failed the test. You don't get that kind of redundancy in modern religion. Then comes the drying. Natron, ancient Egypt's answer to Tupperware, is poured over you until your body is as dry as Pharaoh's humor on a bad day. It itches in a way only the dead can understand. After 40 days of being pickled in salt, your skin takes on the texture of sun-baked papyrus and the smell of ancient goat. But wait, there's more. You get wrapped. Not in comfort or dignity, but in linen, miles and miles of it. Enough to clothe a small army, or at least a very determined band of thieves pretending to be priests. Every finger and toe gets its own bandage. Spells are muttered. Amulets are shoved into awkward places. One priest accidentally sneezes into the wrappings. It's considered good luck. And then, finally, your body, or what's left of it, is placed inside not one, not two, but 4 coffins. Like a cursed nesting doll, each layer gets heavier, shinier, and somehow more claustrophobic. The final sarcophagus is so heavy it requires 20 men, and a lever system designed by someone who clearly never had to use it themselves. They almost drop you. Again, it's considered a sign. The tomb isn't done, of course. No pharaoh dies on schedule. The workmen have been chiseling hieroglyphs about your greatness while you were still alive, which is awkward when the mood shifts and suddenly they need to emphasize your divine humility. Murals are updated. Symbols are checked. A suspicious number of cats are depicted. The afterlife, it seems, is big on cats. Your treasure is assembled, not your actual treasure, which was mostly pilfered to pay for wars, temples, and that one really expensive obelisk that never stood straight. No, these are symbolic offerings. Gold, painted wood, painted bread, and tiny figurines called a shabti that are supposed to do your chores in the next world. You get over 400 of them. You'd laugh if you had lungs. The priests chant. The tomb is sealed. The door is plastered shut with curses, warnings, and some good old-fashioned over-engineering. The living depart. Silence falls. Then, of course, come the robbers. Not a decade passes before someone, probably a cousin's nephew's dentist, bribes the guards, pries open the entrance, and makes off with your scepters, your ceremonial com, and your slightly ironic statue of Mart. They leave the bread. They always leave the bread. The afterlife, it turns out, tastes like moldy barley and broken dreams. And what of you? You wait. Not in eternal slumber, but in something closer to bureaucratic limbo. Your spirit navigates the dot, the Egyptian underworld, which is basically a snake, infested IKEA maze designed by gods who never once had to walk it themselves. There are rivers of fire, doors that talk, and demons with names like Shoes, Spines, and Mistress of the Bubbling Pits. Each trial must be passed with the correct spell, the right amulet, and the unwavering confidence that you really did pay the priests enough to get the full deluxe package. Somewhere in the middle of it all, you start to wonder if maybe it was better to be a baker. But eventually, you reach the Hall of Mart. You face Osiris, judge of the dead, who stares at you like an overworked teacher marking the final exam of a student who definitely cheated on the essay. Your heart is weighed. The feather floats. You're granted passage into the field of reeds, a perfect version of Egypt, where the Nile flows forever, the crops never fail, and no one ever wakes you up to ask why the grain tax is short again. Still, sometimes late in eternity you think back to the throne, the noise, the endless rituals, the sweating, the sneezing priests, the sand in places sand should not be, and you think, with all the solemn dignity a divine being can muster, being Pharaoh sucked. But at least now, finally, you get to rest. Sort of, until the archaeologists show up with cameras. And questions. And no respect for a guy buried with 400 tiny servants.